It is my honor to be here. You can hear me, right? Because I have this secret microphone on, the hidden microphone. I didn't mean to insult you by saying it's complicated. I just didn't know if I could do it on the fly for you like that. It's too complicated for me. I am honored to be here. It's nice to come to a state where it's warm. I'm coming from Florida. It's not warm right there right now, actually. I live in North Florida, which is palm trees, not pine trees, or pine trees, not palm trees. And I just talked to my husband, and he said it was 45 degrees when he got up this morning. Yeah, so we are suffering from global warming in Florida. How many of you realize that things aren't going quite the way they should? Well, let me tell you something. I always teach from the founder's perspective. And so you're going to hear a lot of their words. But let me tell you what Thomas Paine said. He said, "These are the times that try men's souls." Make no mistake, you are in those times now. You are not paranoid. You are not apocalyptic. You're not wearing a tinfoil hat. What you see is actually worse than what you see. Does that make you feel better? And what we're here tonight to do is show you a few things. Principally just how bad it really is. But also to show you that there is hope in that message. We're having this big scandal with the IRS, right? I just happen to be associated with a group that got tangled up in this. Unite in Action was a group that filed for 501c3. We are being represented by Jay Sekulow. And we were very vindicated. What was that word you used, Aaron? Vindicated all of this. But the problem still exists. We have become a nation of people who have been so used to treating symptoms that we can no longer identify what the disease is. You see, we want to talk about the IRS targeting the conservative groups, when two questions should come to mind immediately. What is the IRS doing targeting anyone? Right? But even before that, why do we have an IRS doing anything? The IRS is a completely unconstitutional agency. And we've accepted that for so long because we have failed to teach the truth about the founding of our nation and the truth about our Constitution for so long. We have come to accept some things to be a matter of truth, a matter of daily life, that simply are not so. I am from here going to Yakima, Washington. And I was on the radio in Yakima right before I came here. And I was explaining to them, you know, we have some problems because we simply don't understand the Constitution anymore. And he was asking me, who do you see to be the principal violators of our Constitution today in government? I said, the House of Representatives, the Senate, the President, and the Supreme Court of the United States. And while you're at it, why don't you throw your state legislature in there as well? Now, he was sort of shocked, I think, or maybe he wasn't shocked, he was just simply playing devil's advocate, because I specifically named, before I named the House and the Senate, I specifically named John Boehner. And he was sort of shocked, or I guess maybe playing devil's advocate, saying, oh, well, but this is not simply a Democrat thing, then, is it? I said, well, no. He asked me, how is it that the Congress you've lumped Congress and in this? I said, because the Congress has handed more power to this president than he's stolen on his own. Not only that, they're doubly accountable because they're handing power to the president and they're not standing against him stealing it from them either. Now, I have a tendency, and I hope this doesn't offend, to pick on the conservatives more than the liberals. Because I know what the liberal looks like. He's told us what he wants to do. My problem with the conservatives are, they're the ones that stood up in front of us and said, I'm taking an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I promise to defend your liberty. I promise to defend the Constitution. I promise to secure liberty in this nation. And they fail. With excuses. And with our protection. You see, the liberals are like a snake. I live in the country. I'm a Second Amendment girl. I know what to do when I see a snake. The problem with these conservatives that are not really conservatives is they're snakes too. But they're dressed up in a bunny suit. So when I have to treat the snake like the snake that he is, all of a sudden I hear, oh, no, don't do that. That's not a snake. That's a cute little bunny. No, I'm sorry. It's a snake. I don't care what he's wearing on the outside. I don't care if he has an R. I don't care if he has an NRA rating. He is a snake, and he must be exterminated. And I don't know, I haven't been this far west before, so I don't know if you guys are aware of the fact that John Boehner is a traitor to this nation. Because you see, Thomas Paine said, these are the times that try men's souls. He says, the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink from the service of their country. You see, the summer soldier and the sunshine patriots are not the liberals. They're not the progressives. The summer soldiers and the sunshine patriots are the John Boehners, the John McCains, the Lindsey Grahams, the Marco Rubios, the ones that have stood before you and professed that they are going to support and defend the Constitution, and when the Constitution is on the chopping block, every single time they vote against it. And identifying. See, when you're in the middle of times that try men's souls, you always see a sifting of the wheat from the chaff. And when we identify the chaff in this system, it's going to break our hearts. But he goes on to say, those who stand by it now, meaning our country, will deserve the love and thanks of man and woman. I'm here to help you be those who will stand. Because in the times that try men's souls, sometimes relying on your own internal fortitude is not going to be enough. Because there are going to be some times that are going to be very tough. There are going to be some very difficult decisions to be made. Will you stand for liberty or will you choose a paycheck instead? Will you stand for liberty or will you acquiesce to Obamacare so you don't have to pay the price? You see, the problem is that liberty comes at a price. John Philpott Cran said in 1790, it is the common fate of the indolent, the lazy, the idle, to see their liberty stolen by the active. The condition upon which God grants liberty to man, he says, is eternal vigilance. And if that condition be broken just once, he says, servitude is his punishment, an immediate indication of his guilt. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. If you're being eternally vigilant, there is never a moment in your life when you are not standing in defense of liberty. Problem is, we haven't been standing in defense of liberty for quite some time now. You recognize that, right? But that debt has still been accruing. The price of eternal vigilance accrues, much like our national debt. And we think $17 trillion is going to be difficult to pay back. Wait till we see the bill that we've accrued for liberty. See, it's not a matter of will you pay for it. It's a matter of when will you pay for it. John Adams said, liberty must be supported at all hazards. Notice he said liberty. He did not say health care. Now, I have a radio show that runs every morning from 6 a.m. Eastern Time, which means that's 3 a.m. for you, which I've become acutely aware of. Since I'm on the West Coast, I still have to broadcast live on the East Coast every morning at 6 a.m. But I also have a radio show that runs at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoons through Genesis Communications Network. And I'm always telling my listeners, I endeavor to teach you the truth. That's all I want to do. If I interject opinion, I'm going to let you know this is my opinion. But 95% of the time, I am going to teach you facts, truths from the framer's perspective. But you see, there's a catch there. Because the truth is not fair and balanced. The truth hurts. And John Adams said liberty is to be supported at all hazards. He did not say your Social Security. He did not say your Medicaid or your Medicare. Because you see, without liberty, you have none of those things. Have you heard of a guy named Patrick Henry? Patrick Henry gave that speech, give me liberty or give me death, right? He says, what would gentlemen wish? What would they want? Is life so dear and peace so sweet to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take. But he says, give me liberty or give me death. Now we know that Patrick was saying, I'd rather die than not have liberty, right? But you see, he was saying so much more in that. He is speaking to a group of people who have assembled much like this, but there are a whole lot more people. And they were deciding what they're going to do. I mean, this is a packed out church house. And they have come to the end of their straw with the tyranny that they've been facing through George III and Parliament, and they're meeting. They're trying to decide what is going to be our next step. Patrick Henry was advocating the overthrow of the Crown of Great Britain to establish their own new government. And in his advocating for a new government, he's asking them, when we establish this new government, what would gentlemen wish? What would they want? He's saying, okay, we're going to start a new government. What would be the greatest achievement that we could get? The greatest thing that we could hope for is we're establishing a new government. And then he answers that question. He says, life, peace. Because the greatest achievement of any nation of people is that its people have a right to life. And they have the right to live that life in peace. But then he flips it on his head. He says, are those two things, our greatest achievements, are those two things so dear to us that we would purchase them with chains and slavery? He's saying, without liberty, your life will be servitude. Without liberty, your peace, what do we call that today? National security, right? Without liberty, your national security will be your chains and bonds. That's why Benjamin Franklin said anyone who would trade liberty for temporary security will soon have neither. And that's why John Adams said liberty must be supported at all hazards. Now, John Adams was writing a dissertation on feudal and canon law. He went on to say, liberty must be supported at all hazards. We have a right to it derived from our Maker. Have you heard of a principle called natural law? Natural law, you've probably heard of John Locke then, right? Okay, well, John Locke did not invent natural law. Natural law teaches that it was invented in the garden when God breathed life into Adam. But you see, our framers studied John Locke and studied how he presented natural law. And he presented natural law in such a way that it explains that we are created in the image of God. And since we are created in the image of God, we have inherited certain things from God. As an example, we are all biologically created in the image of our parents, right? Our hair color, our eye color, how tall we are, how short I am, all come from being created in the image of my parents. Ladies, you can join me here. The older I get, the more I look in the mirror, the more I see my mother, right? Well, natural law teaches we are created in the image of God, and we've inherited certain things from God by the nature of that creation. One thing that we've inherited from God is freedom. God being the most ultimate free being in the universe. We've inherited that freedom, but not the wisdom and not the power. Problem is, this is one truth that might challenge you a little bit at first. We do not want to live in a country that is free. We cannot live in a country that is free. Because if we live in a nation of people built on freedom alone, that means I'm free to lie, I'm free to steal, I'm free to murder. I am free to do whatever is right in my own mind, regardless of how that affects you. Does that sound like a place you want to live? Because you see, liberty and freedom are not the same thing. Freedom all by itself is anarchy. Liberty is simply freedom plus morality. That shared morality that allows us to live together in a nation where we are free, where we recognize we are free to lie, we are free to steal, we are free to murder, but we won't because it's wrong. You see, there are only two things that will stop a man from murdering his neighbor. It's not criminal laws. Criminal laws are not designed to stop crimes. Criminal laws are designed to identify criminal activity and set up a mechanism to punish criminals. If criminal laws stopped crimes, we would be a crime-free nation because we've got way too many criminal laws. There are only two things will stop a man from murdering his neighbor. And that's knowing that he is free to do so. He is free to go next door and shoot his neighbor if he chooses, but he will not because it is wrong. The second thing is a well-armed neighbor. John Adams said, liberty must be supported at all hazards. We have a right to it derived from our Maker, but if we had not. Our fathers have bought and purchased it for us with their ease, their estates, their pleasure, and their blood. There are two things that you should catch in that statement, at least. Number one, John Adams is saying, hey, I know we pledge life, fortune, sacred honor for your liberty, but I want you to know we didn't invent liberty. We inherited it. Our fathers purchased it for us. Actually, three things. The second thing is, their fathers pledged their ease, their estates, their pleasure, and their blood. Our founders pledged life, fortune, sacred honor. Liberty comes at a price. A dear price. The third thing is it's a price that must be paid, not to secure your own liberty, but to secure the liberty of your posterity. They said, we are not building a nation for ourselves. We are building a nation for ages and millions yet unborn. Liberty is not a gift you purchase for yourself. Liberty is a gift you pay forward. And if we are negligent in that gift, we do not suffer. If you are under the age of 25, please stand up right now. Stay standing. Stay standing. Stay standing. Stay standing. You got young legs. It's not going to kill you. If we are negligent in our responsibility to preserve liberty, these are the faces that will pay the ultimate price. Sam Adams said, if we tamely suffer a lawless attack on liberty, we encourage it. You can sit down now. Did you hear that? We encourage it, which means if you sit around and do nothing, it's not the equivalent of doing nothing. It is the equivalent of hurrying along tyranny in its path. If we tamely suffer a lawless attack on liberty, we encourage it. He goes on to say, and we involve others in our doom. It is a serious consequence to consider, he says, because ages and millions yet unborn will be the miserable sharers of our experience. Life, fortune, sacred honor, ease, estate, pleasure, blood. What do we think the price of liberty is today? Well, we think it means we're turning off American Idol or Dancing with the Stars and peeling ourselves off the Lazy Boy once every 2 years to vote. If we're lucky, because the majority of people statistically don't vote in local elections. They wait until the glamorous national elections, which is completely ironic. Because you have no power in the national elections. All your power is in local elections. But statistics show of church-going Christians, people who identify themselves as regularly attending church, only 40% of those are registered to vote. And of that 40% that are registered to vote, only 40% of those actually vote. Do you know what that means? That means, statistically speaking, only 25% of the Christian population that identifies themselves as regularly attending church actually vote. We are not a reflection of our government. Our government is a reflection of the people. And the people who identify themselves with a standard of morality are simply not shining, reflecting very brightly. And you wonder what's going on. Because you see, we do not have a political crisis in this country. We do not have an economic crisis in this country. We do not have a national security crisis in this country. We have a moral crisis in this country. It is immorality alone that will allow a politician to stand in front of you and breathe the words $17 trillion in debt and just simply be upset about it. It is immorality that allows a politician to stand before you and say one thing and then turn around and do another. It is immorality that allows a national government whose only job was to secure the blessings of liberty to our posterity, to protect our borders, to protect us from foreign invasion, to want to run guns, want amnesty for criminals. It is only immorality in a government that allows that. So where did we go wrong? Well, we simply do not know what they knew that allowed them to have the courage to say life, fortune, sacred honor. We don't have the confidence in our Constitution. We don't have the confidence in our principles that they had because we have not been taught the right things. You see, we have been taught the Constitution is a living, breathing document. We have been taught that it's fundamentally flawed, that it's been written by a bunch of rich white guys who hated everybody but themselves and their money. And they were simply doing it to establish a brand new monarchy in their own name. But that's simply not true. You see, John Adams knew that in 1041, his fathers, you know, the ones that pledged ease, fortune, estates, and blood for his liberty, his fathers in 1041 England already had the most complex form of government in all medieval times. Great Britain was unique from every other nation because they had common law. Now, this is something hard for us to understand. But what I want you to try to envision is the fact that in 1041 England, the people of Great Britain have always been subjects to a king. Always. They've never had a voice in government. When you are the subject to a king, you wake up every morning wondering what the king is going to do to you. But you see, Great Britain is unique because they have common law. And you could wake up every morning and know exactly what the government was going to do because common law was a common set of laws, commonly known to everyone, based on common social standards and principles, and theoretically commonly applied against all people. Not only that, they had a king by the name of Edward the Confessor. Edward was a pretty decent king as far as kings go, and Edward had given the people the opportunity to be heard. Twice a year, the people could meet with their barons and lords. Now, the barons and lords are the equivalent of their lawmakers. So twice a year, they're meeting with their barons and lords to explain the things that they like about government and the things that they don't like about government. Now, the idea is that the barons and lords are going to take these suggestions of the people to the king. What do you suppose the king will do with those suggestions? Whatever he wants, right? He's king. What does he care? Remember, they're subjects. They have no right to be heard. They just simply have a privilege, an opportunity that's been established by the king. Well, Edward is on his deathbed, and he's got no heir to the throne. But the people of Great Britain are desperate to keep an Englishman on the throne because they like the way Edward is running things. So they try to appoint Edward's second in command by the name of Harold to be King of England. But the year is 1066. You don't appoint kings and you don't elect them. Not yet, anyway. You'll catch that later. But you see, just because Edward doesn't have a son doesn't mean there isn't an heir to the throne somewhere, and there is. He has a cousin. His name is William I. William I lives in Normandy. William is not happy at all that he's being passed over for the crown. And unfortunate for the people of Great Britain, William has a nickname. He's called William the Conqueror. What do you suppose happens when you make a guy mad whose nickname is the Conqueror? He conquers, right? So he raises his Norman army, goes over to Great Britain, defeats Harold and the English people in the Battle of Hastings of 1066. Now, there I see some people who are our seasoned saints who have probably heard that in school. Anybody younger than them probably has not. Or it was presented as memorize this date and had absolutely no significance whatsoever. But it is a very significant point in history. Because you see, William hated Great Britain. Now, we don't have to hear from William that he hated Great Britain, right? We can judge a man by his actions instead of his words. Don't you wish we voted like that? See, I have this story that I tell. I have a conversation that I had with a woman in Florida. Now, there's one thing that shoots my blood pressure through the roof, and it's cult of personality worship of politicians. The complete inability to see someone's flaws simply because you think they're great. And so I had this conversation with this lady about a politician, and I said, and she was totally in love with this politician. I said, she was like you and me now, conservative, Tea Party person. She says, he's such a great guy. I said, have you seen his voting record? Because every single time he votes against the Constitution. She says, I know, but he's a really nice guy. I said, I know he's a really nice guy. I've met him. I've met his wife. They're really nice people. The problem is, every time the Constitution's on the chopping block, he votes against the Constitution. She says, yes, I know, but his votes aren't really reflecting the kind of guy that he is. I said, if his votes don't, then what does? Because you see, I can guarantee you one of two things about any politician and their votes. Guarantee. No other options. Two things. They stand in front of you, give you a rip-roaring speech. I love America. The Constitution, the foundational document of America. The defender of liberty. I will support and defend. Just vote for me. And then when they get the time to vote, they vote against the Constitution. One of two things will always be true. Number one, he's lying to you. He doesn't believe anything that he's telling you. He's simply telling you that to get you to vote for him so he can achieve his own personal gain. And then when it comes time to vote his conscience, because that's what they do. When it comes time to vote his conscience, that's exactly what he does, because his conscience is contrary to his word. Or, when he's standing in front of you, he really is telling you what he believes in his heart and his soul. He really believes this is a great nation. He really believes that it's the Constitution that preserves that greatness. He really, really believes that. But when it's time for him to vote his conscience, he's so weak in character, so weak in moral fortitude, that someone can talk him into, for one reason or the other, voting against his conscience. Either way, does that sound like somebody you want to represent you? I'm sure you could come up with some names. Do you have any particular idea who I was talking about in Florida? Marco Rubio. Votes against the Constitution every single time. And then when his employees in Florida try to point out his error, he gets angry at us. He had to be physically removed by one of his aides when he was discussing with us some of these things, because he got so angry at us questioning his vote. See, we have to judge William by his actions and not by his words. And one of the first things Williams does is he passes a law that says if you're going to speak to the king in the court, you can't do it in your native language of English. You must do it in French. Can you imagine going to Washington, D.C. and being told you couldn't speak to the president unless you learned a foreign language? Well, you see, that's not all William did. Because if that's all William did, we probably wouldn't be here today. But you see, William hated Great Britain. And William set about to fundamentally transform Great Britain into Normandy. Now, if you are going to change a nation that is unique, what is the first thing that you're going to attack? The thing that makes it unique, right? What made it unique? And what made Great Britain unique? We talked about it. Common law. What makes America unique? So William first starts to attack the common law. How does he do that? He starts replacing the judges in the common law system with judges who are not loyal to the common law, but loyal to the ideology of the king in the hand that feeds them. He starts using those judges in that corrupted court system to enforce his foreign Norman law on the people of Great Britain. He starts inserting himself into the churches through his agents and people who are loyal to the ideology of the king, not loyal to the word of God, in order to enforce his unconstitutional laws and collect his taxes. He starts chasing the private landowners off of their land through threat and force itself, literally running some of them completely out of the kingdom, and then handing over their land to his foreign friends. How else do you keep foreign law in a nation if it's not full of foreigners who appreciate the foreign law more than the common law of the land? This goes on for about 40 years. William has had 4 sons. He and his first son do not get along, which is probably an understatement of the century, because he and his oldest son get into an argument, and his oldest son tries to murder him. Now, when his oldest son fails to murder his father, he decides, since his dad's king, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and get out of town. He runs off to the Holy Land to fight in the Crusades. His second son is killed in an accident, leaving his 2 younger sons, William II and Henry I, heir to the throne. Upon William's death, William II takes the throne, and he is described by historians and the people of Great Britain as being a wicked and vicious king. He rules for a little while until one day when William II and his brother Henry I go hunting together. And William II is killed in a mysterious hunting accident by a stray arrow from his brother's party. Now, Henry says, I am not responsible for my brother's death, but the people of Great Britain are not buying this. So, the government, in order to appease the people, says, we're going to do an investigation. We're going to call it a grand tribunal. Can you imagine what happens when the government investigates itself? Like Eric Holder being investigated by the Department of Justice, right? You're going to get the same results. The investigation comes up with the answer that Henry is not at fault for the death of his brother and he's fit to be king. Well, the people of Great Britain are not buying this either. So Henry has to make 2 promises. The first thing that he promises is to marry an Anglo-Saxon woman. Now, the Anglo-Saxons are the majority of the population in Great Britain. And his advisors think it wise to marry an Anglo-Saxon woman because what's the best way to appease the people? To first appease the majority. How is he going to appease the majority? Because this is important. He's going to give them representation on the throne. Henry is going to attempt to move the kingdom back in the direction that Edward was because they recognize that the people have gotten used to a little bit of representation. Now, the second thing that Henry does is the most important thing, the whole reason we're talking about Henry today. Henry signs the first document in the genealogy of our Constitution. It's called the 1100 Charter of Liberties. The 1100 Charter of Liberties is a promise from Henry that kings will no longer be evil and oppressive. He makes a list of things, a short list, mind you, of things that kings will no longer be allowed to do because if the kings engage in this behavior, they are definitely evil and oppressive. Now, it's not amazing that he did this, but what is amazing is what is on the list. Now, I'm not going to read you the whole list. It's a short list, but I'm not going to read it to you. I'm going to just give you 2. It says, if any of my barons or earls shall die, their heirs shall not be forced to purchase their inheritance, but shall retrieve it through force of law and custom. Because in 1100 England, a king recognized that when an heir is forced to purchase their inheritance from the government, that is evil and oppressive. So please tell me, How is it that a king in 1100 England recognized that inheritance tax was evil and oppressive? Isn't that what inheritance tax is? So what does that say about Congress?
Evil and oppressive.
All right, how about this one? If any of my barons commit a crime, he shall not bind himself to the crown, as was done in the time of my father and brother, but shall stand for the crime as the law demands, and make amends as are appropriate. Because in 1100 England, the king, a king, who has no obligation to be just, no obligation to liberty, a king identified that when the men who make the laws consider themselves above the law, that is evil and oppressive. Don't you wish Eric Holder had a little piece of that? Now look, let me tell you something. I'm extremely cynical. Alexander Hamilton said, experience is the oracle of truth, and where its responses are unequivocal, they ought to be held to be sacred and conclusive. I have no hope for the Benghazi hearings because I saw the Fast and Furious hearings. I know how worked up we were over Fast and Furious. It's exactly the same thing that I see with Benghazi. And mark my words, there will be some crisis that will distract us from this. And our fickle, feeble-minded Congress will move on to the next crisis. See, I was a prosecutor. I worked in the prosecutor's office for almost 9 years. Having watched the Fast and Furious hearings, I can guarantee you two things very easily. Number one, we did not see all the evidence that Congress had against Eric Holder, or Hillary Clinton, or Barack Obama. That is a prosecutorial fact. Number two, of the evidence that we did see, if they had that evidence against me, I would not be getting a finger wagging from Darrell Issa. I would be under a federal prison because in this country, when you aid and abet a murder, that makes you a principal to that murder, which makes you guilty of the murder as if you'd pulled the trigger yourself. Eric Holder is a murderer. What did we do to him? Gave him a raise. Gave him a hearing. Ooh, hearing. What did we do in the hearing? We found him in contempt, right? Well, let me ask you something, because there is a penalty. Have you read Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution lately? Article 2 of Section 4 of the Constitution is what we technically refer to as the impeachment clause. It commands Congress. It says, Congress shall. That's a command in the legal world. You have no choice. Congress shall remove from office. Who? The president, the vice president, and a third class of people we always forget, all civil officers. The president, the vice president, and all civil officers for what? If they're found guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors. Isn't Eric Holder a civil officer? Isn't contempt a misdemeanor? The Constitution demands, commands, requires, through Article 2, Section 4, that Eric Holder be removed from office. Which one of our congressmen has even discussed this? Well, now you understand why I say they're all destroying the Constitution. Because ignoring one provision of the Constitution, especially ignoring a provision that is a command, a directive, a requirement, just sears their conscience and allows them to ignore any position on the Constitution they choose. And when the Constitution does not limit the government, what does? Their own will. You see, that's the difference between a kingdom and a monarchy and a republic. In a republic, all the power, all the rights belong to the people. And the people limit government. In a kingdom, all the power and all the rights belong to the government, and they limit the people. Well, we were not better off in 1100 England than we are today. Henry only signed the 1100 Charter of Liberties because he wanted to appease the people. But you see, it's not about government, and it's about the understanding that there's an evolution of liberty that we're experiencing here. An awakening in the hearts and the minds of the souls of people that liberty is the inherent possession of men. That it has to be given to us by God, but it is maintained at a price. It's not the gift of governments. So when the most evil king that England has ever known is on the throne, in 1200, the people have a promise. His name is John. John is a massive taxation king. Now that's not why he's evil and oppressive. He's evil and oppressive because if you can't pay taxes in John's world, which are highly likely, you are arrested, you are imprisoned, you are mutilated, you are executed. They said he was ruthless and vicious in his tax collection. You guys know John. You probably don't realize it. Heard of a guy named Robin Hood? That's the king in Robin Hood's day, was this John. To take a second to show you how deep your socialist indoctrination goes. Robin Hood's claim to fame, rob from the rich and give to the poor, right? But that's not true. Robin Hood was not engaged in redistribution of wealth. Isn't that what robbing from the rich and giving to the poor is? Robin Hood was a liberty fighter. You see, Robin Hood was not robbing from the rich in general. He was taking from the king the money that had been stolen from the people through oppressive taxation, returning it to the people so they could literally live. Because remember, John's murdering you if you can't pay your taxes. Something else interesting about John's reign. If you cannot pay your taxes, you're murdered. And murdering people for not paying their taxes is not enough to bring a revolution of the people. Sounds strange, doesn't it? It's human nature. Because when people are focused only on money, when they're only focused on prosperity, on our economy, on provisions, history proves that tyrants will always trickle down just enough to keep us happy slaves. Well, tyrants always make a fundamental error. John's fundamental error happens when the people of Great Britain choose a man by the name of Stephen Langton to be their archbishop. John steps up and says, I don't like this guy. I'm king. I'm going to pick who the head of your church is going to be. He's going to be someone I approve of. But you see, John had forgotten about the 1100 Charter of Liberties. And the very first promise in the 1100 Charter of Liberties, very first one, perhaps maybe first because it's the most important, declared that the church will be forever free from government intrusion. Does that sound familiar? That's the first aspect of our First Amendment. We didn't invent that in 1787. We inherited it because a king in 1100 England said it's evil and oppressive when your government gets in the middle of your church. So let me ask you a question. I don't know if you have your pocket constitutions with you or any books or anything, but I want you to close them right now. Because what we're going to do is we're going to have a pop quiz. And I want you to get a real, honest, personal assessment of the answer to this question. Do not answer out loud. Do not tip off your neighbor to the answer to this question because it's very important that each individual have a personal assessment. Now I want you to answer this. Name all 5 protections in the First Amendment. There are 5 individual protections of liberty in the First Amendment alone. Name all 5. Some will have to admit that they could only name 4. Some will have to admit they could only name 3. In a group this size, some probably could only name 1 or 2 or maybe even 1. So let me ask you this question. If you don't know what your rights are, how do you know they're not already gone? You see, the Bill of Rights was not written to protect your rights. The Bill of Rights cannot protect your rights. Can the Bill of Rights go pick up a pen and paper and write your congressman when he refuses to follow the Bill of Rights? Can the Bill of Rights go sit himself in your congressman's office and get in his face and fire him for violating the Bill of Rights? Can the Bill of Rights pick up a sword? No. The Bill of Rights was never designed to protect your rights. The Bill of Rights was designed to be a sentinel, an alarm bell. Richard Henry Lee said we needed the Bill of Rights to be a sentinel for those unavoidable periods of inattentiveness. They knew we would become pacified in prosperity. They knew we would become lazy in luxury. So they wanted us to have an alarm, so that when the government got close to our rights, that alarm would go off and we would be able to step forward and say, hey, that's a no-tread zone. Problem is, if you don't know what your rights are, that alarm that's supposed to awaken you becomes a silent alarm. And while it's ringing its head off, your rights are being usurped one right after another. A revolution is born against John, bringing us the second document in the genealogy of our Constitution, the Magna Carta of 1215. Now let me ask you, how many of you before today have heard of the Magna Carta? How many of you before today heard of the 1100 Charter of Liberties and you didn't hear it from me? You see, we love to start at the Magna Carta. I don't know why. But we're selling ourselves short because the Magna Carta is not a standalone document. The Magna Carta does not exist without the 1100 Charter of Liberties. The 1100 Charter of Liberties is the king saying, kings will no longer be evil and oppressive, and we promise this to be so. The Magna Carta is the people saying, you made a promise that you won't be evil and oppressive anymore. You obviously have no idea how to keep that promise. So we are going to set up a set of guidelines that will now tell the king how to run the kingdom in order to keep that promise. And while we're at it, we're going to put 25 common-born men right there in the king's court that will tell him, you can't do that because it violates your promise. Now look how big this is. A king wrote the 1100 Charter of Liberties. The people wrote the Magna Carta. Remember, these are people that are still subjects to a king. People who have no right to anything unless the king decrees it to be so. But they've had such awakening in the understanding of liberty that they're stepping up now and saying, hey, wait a minute. This is our liberty and we will be involved in it. The Magna Carta says there'll be no taxation without representation. Clauses 39 and 40 of the Magna Carta declare that we have a right to habeas corpus and due process. Our 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments were not invented by the framers of this nation. They were inherited when the people stood against an evil and oppressive king. John signs the Magna Carta not because he thinks it's a great idea, but because he has a sword at his throat. And he'd lose the throne a year later. And the people have greater protection for liberty, but they will have to fight for the next 400 years to maintain that liberty and get better advancements, better protections. The year is now 1620. The king is Charles I. I'm particularly fond of Charles I because he reminds me so much of my own king. See, Charles is a massive spending king. The people of Great Britain describe Charles as romping about Europe, spending on his every whim and fancy. Whose money is he spending? The taxpayers, right? And how does he collect their money? Through taxes. Parliament, which is now that committee of 25 men, stands up to Charles and says, "We're not passing any more of your taxes until you stop this spending, stupid. You get your spending under control and maybe we'll pass some more taxes." Charles says, "Fine, lest you forget, I'm king. What do I need Parliament for?" And he dissolves Parliament. Now let me ask you something. Did he have to physically remove Parliament? Could he have possibly just said, "Hey, Parliament, where you refuse to legislate, I'm going to regulate"? Or perhaps he gave a State of the Kingdom address and said, "If Parliament won't pass laws, I will." Isn't that the same as dissolving Parliament? Ignoring their presence and devaluing their power? Well, Charles has a problem with logic, because you know tyrants do. It's okay to dissolve Parliament in violation of the Magna Carta, but he realizes he can't pass a tax. He's not going to stop spending, otherwise he'd have left Parliament there. So he's got to figure out what he's going to do to collect the money of the people. But then he realizes, hey, wait a minute, I'm king. I don't have to pass a law. I can pass an executive decree. And I won't call it a tax. He calls it a forced loan. What is it called when a government forces you to do something? Isn't that called a mandate? It's not a tax, it's a mandate. It's not a mandate, it's a tax. 7 knights stood in front of Charles and said, "We don't care what you call it, this is taxation without representation, and we're not paying it." Because sometimes you're going to have to stand to the king and suffer the consequences. Charles throws them in prison, denies them their habeas corpus. The court releases a statement that the crimes these men have committed are so egregious, so heinous and such a threat to the kingdom itself that these men cannot have their day in court, and they die in prison. But a revolution is born, bringing the third document in the genealogy of our Constitution, the Petition of Right of 1628. The Petition of Right of 1628 is a list of grievances against Charles I on how he's violated the Magna Carta and broken the promise of the 1100 Charter of Liberties. Now, did you catch that? A list of grievances. Because that's the 5th protection in our First Amendment. We have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, the freedom to assemble, and the freedom to redress the government of our grievances. We didn't invent that. We inherited it. They've been doing that since at least 1628. Charles signs this Petition of Right, not because he thinks it's a great idea, because, like John, he has a sword at his throat. But they're not going to remove Charles from the throne. They're going to leave Charles there. But the people have had such an incredible awakening now. They're watching Charles very, very closely, and they're noticing something about the way he's spending their money. You see, this is a very tumultuous time in Europe. There are wars everywhere. The Moors, the Catholics, the Protestants are all fighting each other for power and territory all over Europe. And Great Britain is having its own eruptions of civil wars because Charles is not keeping his promises. And Charles is now collecting their tax dollars and telling them, we've got to fund these foreign wars. Because we have to make sure that our allies have proper provisions to win these wars. Nobody wants your enemy to win, especially when you're in Great Britain and the equivalent of the enemy winning is like being in California and being against Nevada and Nevada wins, right? Right there. So he's collecting the money from the people and telling them we're going to fund the allies to ensure their victories. But the people are watching him and they're noticing that he's not really funding the allies. He's actually funding the enemies because the enemies have agreed to help him with his civil war problems. Charles is brought up on charges of treason. He's found guilty and sentenced to death, bringing the 4th document in the genealogy of our Constitution, the Grand Remonstrance of 1641. The Grand Remonstrance of 1641, another list of grievances against Charles. Now he's violated the Petition of Right, the Magna Carta, and the 1100 Charter of Liberties. But this is an amazing document. It says, the root of all this mischief we find to be a malignant and pernicious design to subvert the fundamental laws and liberties of this kingdom. That word subvert means to overturn and undermine. And they said, we've been watching tyrants now for 600 years, and we're noticing a pattern here. We're noticing that these tyrants are using the same bag of tricks over and over and over again, and they're calling it a malignant and pernicious design. Are you ready? Corruption of the court system, infiltration of foreign law, diminishing property rights, the government inserting itself in the church, manipulation of the monetary system, and disarming the people while the government remained unlawfully armed. The malignant and pernicious design. So what happened if we established this malignant and pernicious design 370 plus years ago? Are we so intellectually advanced that we've avoided it? I mean, we're not seeing any corruption of the court system or infiltration of foreign law. The government would never insert itself in our church or diminish our property rights, right? No manipulation of the monetary system. Really, they would never disarm us. That's rhetorical, right? So where did we go wrong? Well, let me ask you this real quick. Any of you guys aware of a principle called Agenda 21? Would you be surprised to know that the United Nations did not invent Agenda 21? Charles I was engaged in sustainable development. Go read the Grand Remonstrance of 1641, and you will find significant indication within his grievances that he was applying the principles of sustainable development. But you will run across one grievance that will just blow your mind, because it declares that Charles is taking the private land from the landowners and creating the national king's forests in the name of preservation and depopulation. Not only that, Charles was attempting to take them off the gold and silver standard and was creating brass fiat money. And in 1641, they called that treason and chopped off his head. Wow, Aaron, you got a violent crowd up here. So how have we fallen prey to something that the people in 1641 identified and had firmly established? Because Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past. Have you heard the saying, those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it? That's not true. History always repeats itself. There is nothing new under the sun. Human nature never changes. But those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. We are doomed to follow the malignant and pernicious design because we have not been teaching our children that it exists for generations. Not only that, we've been teaching our children lies about the foundation of this nation. We have been teaching them that the Revolutionary War was fought between the Americans and the British. Only there were no Americans in the Revolutionary War. They were Americans by geography, but by nationality they were proud British citizens. And a war between the Americans and a foreign nation is a foreign war. A war between the British people and their own government is a civil war. There's a big difference between a foreign war and a civil war. Men might go to war in foreign lands for light and transient reasons, but they will never go to civil war unless it's a really big deal after great long contemplation. Not only that, if it was fought between the Americans and the British, who were the Americans? Okay, but besides that, the founders of this nation We're Americans, right? Well, that just means they sort of spontaneously generated here. We're the melting pot, after all. And since we're the melting pot, they had no common background, no common history, no common experience to draw from. And so then we can teach our children the insidious lie that since they had no common understanding, they were just sort of throwing things together to see what would happen. Sort of, I heard one guy say, winging it. And when you think that they had no idea what they were doing and they were just guessing and throwing this at this and throwing that at that, then you can be led to believe that they created a fundamentally flawed document that needs our ever-advanced intellect to reinterpret. That's the new mantra. We need to interpret. We need to reinterpret the Constitution. We need to interpret the Constitution to meet our needs, to meet our modern understandings. This word interpret puzzles me because I was a Russian linguist. And I'm wondering, has anybody told anybody in Washington, D.C. that the Constitution's written in English? Well, you see, we teach these lies. And since they weren't British, what do we care about their history? What do we care that they came to this continent with the 5th document in the genealogy of the Constitution, the very link to the other 4, the very link that ties in all those other 4 documents, the English Bill of Rights of 1689. The English Bill of Rights of 1689, a declaration of grievances against James II on how he's violated the Grand Remonstrance, the Petition of Right, the Magna Carta, and the 1100 Charter of Liberties. It says, whereas the late King James II, by the assistance of evil counselors, judges, and ministers employed by him, did endeavor to subvert and extirpate the laws and liberties of this kingdom. See that word subvert, undermine, overturn, and undermine, but they added a clarification there. They said, and extirpate. That word extirpate, I looked it up because we don't use it much anymore. It means to completely destroy. Can I ask you a question? If we completely destroy something, is there anything left? No, because then it'd only be partially destroyed, right? So what James was doing, the people identified in 1688, during the glorious revolution of 1688, the English people identified that James II was completely destroying liberty. Now, the list is much longer than the 1100 Charter of Liberties. I'm not going to read you the whole list, but I think I only need to read you one to let you know how powerful this is. By assuming and exercising a power of dispensing with and suspending laws in the execution of laws without the consent of Parliament. Because you see, in 1688, they had separation of powers. They had a legislative branch in Parliament, they had an executive branch in the king, and they had a judicial branch. We didn't invent separation of powers, we inherited it. And they said, when the executive branch was writing law, overturning law, and setting aside law, when that is the sole job, duty, and privilege of the legislative branch, that is completely destroying liberty. How is it that a people in 1688 who did not live in a republic where they had all the rights and all the powers, who were subjects to a king, recognized that executive orders were a mechanism that completely destroys liberty? If a people who were not free by birth, a people who were subject to a king, could identify that when the executive branch steals power from the legislative branch, that is destroying liberty, what does that say about our Congress? You'll have to excuse me because this sort of makes me mad. Because you see, I have that lamp that Patrick Henry had. I know what our future looks like. And I'm watching us stumble in the same potholes that our founders died to fill. because we have chosen to submit to the malignant and pernicious design and submit our children to insidious lies whose only purpose is to destroy the Constitution, the thing that makes us unique, so the tyrants can rule again. If we tamely suffer a lawless attack on liberty, we encourage it, and we involve others in our doom. It is a serious consideration, as millions yet unborn will be the miserable sharers of our experience. I'm going to ask you a question that Daniel Webster asked his people in 1806. After what you've heard tonight, is our Constitution worth preserving? Yes. He says, then guard it as you would the seat of your life. He says, guard it not only against the open blows of violence, but listen carefully, because Daniel Webster wrote this in 1806. He said, guard it not only against the open blows of violence, but also against that spirit of change. Miracles do not cluster. That which has happened but once in 6,000 years cannot be expected to happen often, and such a government, once destroyed, would have a void to be filled, perhaps with centuries, with evolution and tumult, riot and despotism. Because see, Daniel Webster knew they went from 1100 to 1215 before they got advancements in liberty. He knew that they went from 1628 to 1641, and from 1641 to 1688, and from 1688 to 1776, battling to maintain liberty. But you see, he also knew that they went from 1215 to 1620, being subjected to tyranny after tyranny and having to fight with their lives to secure liberty for their children. Have you learned something this evening? Let me ask you, do you believe that what you've learned is vital, is essential to the proper understanding and application of the Constitution? Well, you see, I went, when I was in undergraduate school, becoming a biochemist, I worked my way through college for a little while as a plumber. The master plumber who trained me would not let me touch a toilet until he was certain that I had the proper training and expertise to not mess it up. So let me ask you, why did I have to have more training to touch a toilet than your representatives have to touch your liberty? Why aren't we requiring them to have this training? I teach a 5-hour workshop that goes into greater detail in this history, and then I walk through the Bill of Rights, 1 through 10. Give you the same type of lesson for the Bill of Rights, show you where it come from, why they exist, what their purpose is, and how they're supposed to be applied today. I also talk about the 17th Amendment, and that's the place where we lost it all. Now, if I could teach an 8-hour class, I'd talk about the 16th Amendment and several other things as well. But, you know, there are some limitations. At this point, my 5-hour seminar is sort of like drinking from a fire hose. So let me ask you, from what you've learned tonight, would any of you be interested in attending the 5-hour workshop? We'll let Aaron know, and we'll come back and do that. Now, this is a ministry for me. I'm a missionary, I believe, to the people of the United States in defense of the Constitution. I don't charge anything for anything that I do. I don't charge for the 5-hour workshops either. This is my life, my fortune, my sacred honor. Why? Because I have a 7-year-old back there in that booth. And every morning I have to look in his eyes. And I have to try to figure out how I'm going to explain to him how a generation of people could think cell phones, flat-screen TVs, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in affluent neighborhoods with 2 or 3 cars, vacations, and eating out 3 times a week is more important than freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the right to be free from government intrusion, the right to bear arms. And I was put in a position where I had to make a decision. Would I stand for liberty, or would I make excuses when he's a slave. And I decided, my husband and I decided on that day, that if we were Christians and we really believed that liberty was a gift from God, then we'd better put our faith where our mouth is. You see, I don't want to be one who tamely suffers a lawless attack on liberty. I don't want to be one that involves my child in my lazy doom. Because it's not a matter of will you pay. It's a matter of when will you pay. Will you pay now on your own terms? Or will you pay later when you're a slave? Because that is an inevitability. Now, I studied the Russian language, but I also studied the Russian history. I watched the communist takeover of Russia through the eyes of the men and women who lived it. They were my instructors. And I know for fact that if we do nothing, you and I will not suffer. But those people, those young people that I had stand at the beginning of the meeting, they are the ones that we will condemn to buy back a gift that we were supposed to purchase for them. And they won't do it at the ballot box. History dictates they will do it with their blood. Winston Churchill said, "Still, if you will not fight for the right when you can easily win without bloodshed, if you will not fight when your victory will be sure and not too costly, you may have to fight with all the odds against you and only a precarious chance of survival, but there may even be a worse case. You may have to fight when there is no hope of victory, because it is better to perish than to live as a slave." And every day, when you leave here and you lock eyes with some young person in your life or some young person in this community, the question that must go through your mind every single time from this day forward when you see their young faces is, what have I done to preserve their liberty today? It's a daily price that must be paid, and we are way past due for payment. There is no excuse how old, how young you are. We all have a role to play. The hope is 700 years, 5 documents, the oracle of truth. The results are sacred and conclusive. Every single time we stand for liberty, we win. Every single time. And every single time we win greater understanding of liberty with greater protections. We went from a promise of a king to the control of the people, expanding the liberty 3 more times until we come to the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the greatest human rights statements ever written by man, and I don't care what Hillary Clinton or Justice Ginsburg says. You simply must make the decision to stand. Because if you do not, I came all the way from Florida to speak to an empty room. And you spent an hour and a half away from home, going nowhere. Now, this is the part where my husband makes me do. There are 4 ways you can take this history home lesson with you today. I have this book back there. Not a living, breathing document. This is the history that I've just taught you in book form. I also have 2 student books, because if we don't start teaching our children the truth, the government schools and their progressive education system are teaching them that the enemy is their friend, and everything that we do will be for nothing. Even our private school curriculums are written by the same people that write our public school textbooks, so you don't get the full truth all the time. This is the truth from the words of your framers. This book is for non-readers. Let me tell you something. These are not picture books with words that might accidentally teach your child something. These are word books with pictures with the intent to be a tool to educate. This is the book for non-readers. It's in color, and each chapter has a poem in it that acts like a memory verse. So if your child cannot read, they can memorize the memory verse and know the chapter that they've learned. This book is for older students all the way through high school. This is a tool, but it's entertaining as well. Each chapter that teaches the history that I've just taught you today, and then has individual chapters for men and women who founded this nation that they never get to hear about anywhere else. And each chapter is followed by a list of study questions to continue their education. For example, who was the first man to die in the Revolutionary War? It was a black man by the name of Crispus Attucks. There were battalions of freed slaves that fought for our liberty in the Revolution. Some men became free simply to fight. Some men spent their only free breath dying for you and me. How do we repay them? We completely wipe them out of history. That is racist and offensive to me. I talk about the women in there too because, I'm sorry guys, the women sacrificed a whole lot more than the men did. I also have this book, Liberty First. After I teach my workshop, everybody always says, what do we do, KrisAnne? Where do we go from here? Give us some ideas of things that we can do. Well, here it is. 10 chapters, things that we can do as individual citizens to reclaim the foundational principles. You don't need a grant from the Koch brothers. You don't need to form a super PAC. You just need to find your life, your fortune, your sacred honor, and do it. The other way to take the history with you today is a 3-DVD set of my workshop. If you don't want to wait for me to come back, you can take this set home with you. This is not my husband with a camcorder, but is a professional rendition. It is digitally mastered, 3-DVD set of my entire workshop that is chaptered out so you don't have to sit down and watch the whole thing all at one time. You can take it and teach your children. You can take it and teach other groups with it. This is $30. But if you buy this, you get any book for $10. This book is normally $20. This one is $15, and the children's books are $10 a piece. So I want to thank you for your time, now that I've ruined the spirit with my business speech. I do want to thank you for your time, because your being here encourages me. It really does. This is a weary task. I'm not going to lie to you. I have been away from home for a week and a half, and I won't be leaving until the 22nd of May. And my schedule doesn't slow down until November. And that's only because we haven't scheduled any further out from that. I need you to pray for us. We do not fight flesh and blood. We fight spirits and principalities, and they can wear you down. This is not a battle between Republicans and Democrats. This is not a battle between liberals and conservatives. This is a battle between good and evil. The good news is, we will win. Thank you very much.